Hello children, as we already discussed, this video is going to be an integrated for both grade 11 as well as grade 9. Why? Because grade 9 you will read the basics in your chapter 4 and for 11th standard in chapter 1. So I'm going to give 21 concepts here. Only when you are aware of all these 21 concepts, you can understand the next two chapters in unit 1. So shall we get into the topic? Yes. So today we'll read only these concepts. So first we'll start with biodiversity. What do you mean by biodiversity, children? What do you mean by bio? The meaning of bio is life. And what do you mean by diversity? Diversity meaning variety. So just look around the environment. Just see around what are the living factors you see in and around the environment. Can you name one by one? Yes. So what is the first living factor you see? Plants. Then we see animals. Then we also have another living factor which cannot be seen directly through our naked eye, but they also exist in the environment. What are those? Very good. They are microbes. When you take microbes, you have different divisions under that. Can you name? Bacteria, fungi, algae, virus, then parasites, protozoan. So we have different living forms in and around the environment. You call that as biodiversity. So these living forms will have a local name. Say in our native language, the language that we speak, we name all these organisms. But that shouldn't be there. We should have a globalized name. So naming an organism which should be widely accepted by everyone. So that you call it as nomenclature. So first you need to know what is biodiversity. Then you need to know what is nomenclature. So meaning of nomenclature is naming system, naming an organism. Okay. So before naming an organism, you need to identify what is that. So we know, I told you, we have a living form called microbes. Under microbes, we have all these varieties. So how do you categorize these varieties? By different names. So how do you say this is this and this is this? Because of identification. So before nomenclature, you need to identify what is what. Okay. So identification is important. So this is done by the ICBN and the ICZN. What does that ICBN stands for? International Code for Botanical Nomenclature. So here, if it is a plant, that comes under botanical nomenclature. If it is an animal, that comes under zoological nomenclature. So ICBN stands for International Code for Botanical Nomenclature. Biology is common for everything. So International Code for Botanical Nomenclature, this is for plants, and International Code for Zoological Nomenclature, this is for animals. So naming a plant comes under ICBN and naming an animal comes under ICZN. Okay. Now you need to know, how do we name? How do we name? Say for example, if you want to name a child, what are the criteria we follow these days? We go for numerology, astrology and all those logics. Similarly, we have certain principles of naming an organism. So let us see what are the principles of naming. So naming an organism is nomenclature. First, this system was given by the scientist Carolus Linnaeus. So he was the first person to introduce the naming system. He used two names. So he used two naming system. What is a two naming system? Naming an organism in two names. Okay. So this naming an organism, since it has two names, we call that system as binomial nomenclature. So nomenclature meaning name. You name an organism. What do you mean by bi? Two. This means names. Okay, this is naming names. So every living form will have two names. You call that system as the binomial nomenclature. Then, so let us take an example. You know mango, right? So let us take mango as an example. So when you take mango, the botanical, since this is a plant that is named by the ICBN, okay? So the botanical name of mango is Mangifera indica. Mangifera indica. So I told you any living form will have two names, right? So you call this naming system as the binomial nomenclature. So when you write these two names, the first name you call it as genus. So the first name is genus and the second name is species. Okay? So the first name is genus and the second name is species. So these are the principles that you need to know. Then when you write a genus, it should start with a capital letter. So always the genus should follow capitals. And when you write the species, it should be small. So species should be in small. You should not write it in capitals. Then both the words should be underlined separately. So the next principle you need to follow is underline the words separately. And if it is handwritten, you can write it normally. But if it is printed, you should write it in italics. So if it is a printed form, you should write it in italics. Why? Do you know the reason why it need to be written in italics? Because the origin is Latin. Since it is a Latin origin, that should be written in italics. So these are the norms that you need to follow when we go with naming a organism. Any doubts, children? So this was first developed by Carolus Linnaeus, and the biologist gave two naming system, which means every living form will have two names. One is a genus, which comes first and it should be written in capitals. The second name is species, which is small, which is the second name, which should be written in small, and both the names should be underlined and it should be written in italics if it is printed. And one last concept you need to know is sometimes the naming will also include the scientist's name or the biologist's name who introduced. Say for example, Mangifera indica. Linn. Mangifera indica Linn, which means this name was introduced by Carolus Linnaeus, so it includes the scientist names too. Okay. So today, out of 21 concepts, we covered what is biodiversity, about the local names, about nomenclature, identification, ICBN and ICZN, and principles of naming. In the next, we'll discuss the remaining.